Welcome to AminAcademy.com. Let us do the beginning of Modern Ottoman Reforms, Tanzimat. In that, we'll discuss about Ottoman Constitution. The Ottoman Constitution of 1876, also known as the Kanun-i Esasi, was the first written constitution in the Muslim world. It was written by a member of the Young Ottomans led by Midhat Pasha during the reign of Sultan Abdul Hamid II. The constitution was in effect from 1876 to 1878 and again from 1908 to 1922. The constitution established the following principles: liberalism, capitalism, private property, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of association, freedom of expression. The Constitution also established a constitutional monarchy with a parliament consisting of a Senate and Chamber of Deputies. The Senate, the upper house, with senators nominated for life by the Sultan. Chamber of Deputies, the lower house, with members elected by the people. The constitution was the culmination of 19th century reforms that modernized the armed forces and bureaucracy and introduced a more modern taxation system. Perhaps more significant than external changes were the internal political development that brought about the first Ottoman constitution on December 23, 1876. The Tanzimat had produced three types of criticism within the Muslim community. The first was a simple traditionalist opposition. The second was a more sophisticated critique elaborated by certain intellectuals, many of them who had bureaucratic training and some knowledge of Western ideas. The third expressed a determination to control and, if necessary, to depose the Sultan. The intellectuals were known as the Young Ottomans, although some had taken part in secret society, the Patriotic Alliances in 1865, and had some similarity of background. The Young Ottomans were not an organized political party. They are considered as a group of largely through the ancient of their assembly in Paris and London in 1867 to 71. Their political views ranged from secular cosmopolitan revolutionarism to profoundly Islamic traditionalism because his views occupied a middle ground among those in intellectuals and because of his lucidity of expression. Namik Kemal in 1840 to 88 has often been regarded as the representative figure, although he is no more representative than the others. His view, however, had the greatest effect on later reforms. Kemal criticized the Tanzimat reformers for their indiscriminate adoption of Western innovations. While admiring much Western civilization, he believed that the principles underlying its best institutions were to be found in Islam. In particular, he derived from early Islamic precepts and practiced the idea of representative assembly that could check the unbridled power of Sultan and his ministry. He helped to form and popularize the idea of constitution and of loyalty to the Ottoman fatherland. However, it was the third line of criticism, that which sought to control the Sultan, that was most important. Arising with the higher Ottoman bureaucracy itself, it was led by Midhat Pasha. Midhat and others became determined because of their own exclusion from power and because of the disastrous results of Abdulaziz's policies to improve some check on the Sultan's power. A new Sultan with a reputation for liberalism, Murad V, ruled 1876, was installed but quickly became insane and was deposed, replaced by Abdul Hamid II. The experience convinced Midhat of the necessity of a permanent check upon the power of the Sultan, such as could be proved by a representative assembly that would give ministers a basis of support independent of the Sultan. Accordingly, Abdul Hamid was persuaded to agree to a constitution. Although there had been constitutional implications in earlier documents, and although the development of councils, particularly provincial council with their elected elements, had influenced parliamentary aspects, on December 23, documents was the first comprehensive Ottoman constitution, and except for a Tunisian's organic law in of 1861, the first in any Islamic country. The constitution was derived entirely from the will of the ruler, who retained full executive power and to whom ministers were individually responsible. Now, the parliament summoned under the constitution in March 1877 was dissolved in less than a year and was not recalled until 1908. The liberals were exiled, some included Midhat were put to death. Next, rule of Abdul Hamid II. The reign of Abdul Hamid II, 1876 to 1909, is often regarded as having been a reaction against the Tanzimat, but insofar as the essence of the Tanzimat reforms was centralization rather than the liberalization. Abdul Hamid may be seen as its fulfiller rather than its destroyer. The continued development of the army and administrations, the formation of the gendarmerie, and the growth of communications, especially the telegraph and railway, and the formation of elaborate spy system, enabled the Sultan to monopolize power and crush opposition. His brutal repression of the Armenians in 1894 to 96 earned him the European title the Red Sultan, but Abdul Hamid's reign also made positive advances in education, including the renovation of Istanbul University in 1900, legal reforms led by his Grand Vizier Mehmed Said Pasha, and economic development through the construction of the railway in Asia Minor, and Syria with foreign capital and the Hejaz, railway from Damascus to Medina with the help of subscriptions from the Muslims in other countries. Pan-Islamism. The Hejaz railway constituted constituted one element in Abdul Hamid's pan-Islamic policies. Political pan-Islamism had made its first appearances in Ottoman policy at the Treaty of Kukuk-Kainarka with Russia, when the Ottoman Sultan had made claims to religious jurisdiction over Muslims outside his territories, particularly those in Crimea. Some years later, the theory was elaborated by the addition of the baseless legend that in 1517 an Abbasid Caliphate had been transferred to the Ottoman Sultan with the extinction of many independent Muslim states and their absorption into the empires of European powers. The myth of the Caliphate became a useful weapon in the Ottoman diplomatic armory and was exploited by Abdul Hamid as a means of deterring European powers from the pressing him too hard, lest he create dimensions within their own territories. Prevention. prevention of the preservation of the empire. Abdul Hamid too had reasonable success in preserving the empire after 1878. Apart from eastern Romania, no further territories were lost until 1908. Ottoman authority in Tunisia, occupied by the France in 1881, and Egypt, occupied by Britain in 1882, was already significant. In Crete, the Ottomans suppressed revolts and defeated Greece when it intervened in 1897 in support of the Cretans. In Arabia, the Ottomans continued the expansion of their power that had begun into the early 1870s. The Young Turk Revolution in 1908. Several conspiracies took place against Abdul Hamid. In 1889, the conspiracy in the military medical college spread to other Istanbul colleges. The conspirators came to call themselves the Committee of Union of Progress, CUP, and were commonly known as the Young Turks. When the plot was discovered, some of its leaders went abroad to reinforce Ottoman exiles in Paris, Geneva, and Cairo, where they helped prepare the ground for revolution by developing comprehensive critiques of the Hamidian system. The most noteworthy among those were Murad Bey, Ahmed Riza, and the Prince Sahabuddin, the editor of Mizan, that balance, published first in Istanbul 1886 and later in Cairo and Geneva. Murad Bey preached liberal ideas combined with the strong Islamic feelings that may have contributed to his defection and return to Istanbul in 1897. Ahmed Riza in Paris edited Margaret Consultations, in which he set out ideas of reforms strongly flavored by Auguste Comte's philosophy of positivism. The emigres could supply literally sustenances to dissident, but Abdul Hamid could not be overthrown while the army remained loyal. The real origin of the Young Turk Revolution of 1908 lay in the discontent within the Third Army Corps in Macedonia. The young officers who had instigated the revolution, like their civilian supporters, were primarily concerned with preserving the Ottoman Empire. They feared that Hamidian policies and European interventions were endangering its existence. In April 1909, however, an army mutiny in Istanbul, known because of the Julian calendar as the 31st March incident, exposed the weakness of the cup and at the same time gave it a new opportunity. The mutiny resulted from the discontent of ordinary soldiers over their conditions and their neglect by college trained and politically ambitious officers and from what they regarded as infidel innovations. They were encouraged by a religious organization known as the Mohammedan Union. The weakness of the government allowed the mutiny to spread, and although order was eventually restored in Istanbul and more quickly elsewhere, a force from Macedonia, the Action Army, led by Mahmud Sevkat Pasha, marched on Istanbul and occupied the city in April 24. Dissolution of the empire. Abdul Hamid was deposed and replaced by Sultan Mahmud V, ruled in 1909 to 18, son of Abdul Hamid. The constitution was amended to transfer real power to the parliament. The army, and particularly Mahmud Sevkat Pasha, became the real arbiters of Ottoman politics. Race of Cup. Although the removal of many of its political opponents had allowed the CUP to move into a more prominent position in government, it was still weak. It had a core of able, determined men, but a much larger collection of individuals and factions whose unionist affiliation was so weak that they easily merged into other parties. The Liberian Union, too, lost support following defeats in the Balkans that provided the opportunity for a small group of CUP officers and soldiers to stage a coup known as the Sublime Porte incident to force the resignation of Grand Vizier Muhammad Kamil Pasha and establish a new cabinet under Saukat Pasha. Internal developments. The disastrous result of the Young Turks' external policies overshadowed the important internal development of the years 1908 to 18. Further administrative reforms, particularly of provincial administration in 1913, led to more centralization along by European standards. The central Ottoman government retained relatively weak, particularly in the more distant provinces. The burden of taxation was well below that of European powers. The Young Turks were the first Ottoman reformers to promote industrialization with a law for the encouragement of industry. Although they had little success, they did build a framework for later state-directed economic planning. The considerable attention was given to education, especially to the neglected area of primary level. The process of secularism of the law was carried much further. The development in the national journalism took place and the status of women improved. The whole period was one of intense social and political discussion and change. Turkish nationalism. The basic ideological of the state remained Ottomanism and Islam, but a new sense of Turkish identity began to develop. That new concept was fostered by educational work of the Turkish society, formed in 1908, and the Turkic Health, formed in 1912. The political twist was given by the adherent of Pan-Turkism and Pan-Turanism. Pan-Turkism, which aimed at the political union of all Turkish-speaking people, began among Turks in Crimea and along the Volga River. Its leading component was Ismail Gasparinsky, who attempted to create a common Turkish language. Many Pan-Turkists migrated to Ottoman lands, especially after 1905. One of them, Yusuf Akroglu, argued, argued in that Turkish provided a better basis for the Ottoman Empire than either Islam or Ottomanism. Those ideas, however, found little support with the Ottoman government. Foreign relations. The foreign relations of the Ottoman Empire under a Young Turks led to disaster. In 1908, the revolutions provided an opportunity for several powers to press their designs upon the empire. In October 1908, Austro-Hungary annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Bulgaria proclaimed its independence. Italy seized Tripoli and occupied the Didosens and group of islands in the Aegean Sea by the Treaty of Lausanne. The two Balkan Wars in 1912 to 13 almost completed the destruction of the Ottoman Empire in Europe. In the 1st October 1912, in May 1913, the Ottomans lost almost all their European possessions, including Crete to Bulgaria, Serbia, Greece, Montenegro, and the newly created state of Albania. In the 2nd June and July 1913, fought between Bulgaria and the remaining Balkan states over the division of Macedonia. The Ottomans intervened against Bulgaria and recovered part of Western Thrace, including Edirne. The Ottomans had lost more than four-fifths of the territory and more than two-thirds of the population of their European provinces. The people. In 1914, the total population of the Ottoman Empire was approximately 25 million, of which about 10 million were Turks, 6 million Arabs, 1.5 million Kurds, and 1.5 million Greeks, and 2.5 million Armenians. The population of the empire, excluding such virtually independent areas of Egypt, Romania, and Serbia, in the period immediately prior to the losses of 1878, is estimated to have been about 26 millions. Natural increases of Muslim immigration from Russia and the Balkans virtually made up of the losses. In 1914, the population was increasingly homogeneous in religion and languages through a variety of languages continued to be spoken. Ottomans in World War I from 1914 to 18 is the Enver Pasha. The Ottoman entry into World War I resulted from an overly hasty calculation of likely advantage. German influences was strong but not decisive. Germans trade with the Ottomans still lagged behind that of Britain, France, and Austria, and its investment, which included the Baghdad railway between Istanbul to the Persian Gulf, were smaller than those of France. A mission to Turkey led by the German military officer Otto Liman von Sanders in 1913 was only one of the series of German military missions, and Liman's authority to control the Ottoman army was much more limited than contemporaries supposed, except for the interest of Russia in Istanbul and the straits between the Black and Mediterranean seas. No European power had genuinely vital interest in the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman might have remained neutral as a majority of the cabinet wished, at least until the situations become clearer, but the opportunism of the Minister of War, Enver Pasha, early German victories, friction with the triple elements France, Russia, and Great Britain arising out of the shelter given by the Ottomans to German warships, and long-standing hostility to Russian combined to produce an Ottoman bombardment of the Russian Black Sea subports and a declaration of war by the Entente against the Ottoman Empire. After Asia Minor and Cilicia was massacred or deported to eliminate any domestic support for the pro-Christian terrorist enemy on the Eastern Front. Between 600,000 and 1 lakh, 600,000 and 1,500,000 Armenians were killed. These events are now widely described as a genocide of the Armenian people. In 1916, army desertions took place on a massive scale and economic pressures became acute. The surrender of Bulgaria in 1918, which served direct links with Germany, was the final blow. The CUP cabinet resigned on 8 October 7 and a new government was formed under Ahmed Izzat Pasha on October 9. On October 13, the Ottomans signed the armistice, the withdrawals, allied warring and proposed peace settlement. The entreaty proposals for the partition of Ottoman territories were formulated in a number of wartime agreements by the Istanbul Agreements. Russia was promised Istanbul and the Straits. France was to receive a sphere of influence in Syria and Cilicia. Britain had already annexed Cyprus and declared the protectorate over Egypt. By the Anglo-French Sykes-Picot Agreement, the French sphere was confirmed and extended eastward and Mosul in Iraq. The British sphere of influence in Mesopotamia extended as far north as Baghdad, and Britain was given control of Haifa and Acre and the territory linking of Mesopotamia and Haifa Acre spheres. Palestine was to be placed under an international regime. In compensation, the Russian gains were extended to include the Ottoman provinces of Trabzon. Britain made various promises of independence to Arab leaders, notably in the Hussein McMahon correspondence in 1915 to 16 and the Balfour Declaration promised to support the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. The Russian withdrawal in 1917 and post-war bargaining led to some modifications of those agreements. So far we discussed about Ottoman Empire's participation in World War I as well, Turkish nationalism, internal developments, rise of CUP, and Pan-Islamism, about the rule of Abdul Hamid II. We have done. Please subscribe our YouTube channel.